And I'm using a little bit of EQ, just a tiny bit of EQ to kind of give it a hype before I have to add it to the kick drum and the vocal and all that stuff. So just like, I think I'm adding like 20K, maybe like a couple dBs, and maybe at like 60 or 80 hertz in the bass, adding another like dB or something. Nothing crazy. And I think I mentioned 1K. I think I'm adding a little bit of 1K usually. And again, these can change, depends on the mix, obviously. I'm going to mute my phone real quick. Why is it on vibrate? Yeah. And so on like the drums and the bass and the guitars and the vocals, all that stuff, like I don't actually have any EQ or compression set, because it kind of depends on the song and I have to see what the vocalist sounds like. So I'm not that automated, but I will have like also tape saturators set up on specific channels. I pretty much always put tape emulation. Again, I'm using the Slate stuff. I'm a big fan of the Slate plugins. It's a bargain. If you're getting into mixing, it's $15 a month or something like that. And I also use their microphone, which I use in tandem with the same plugins. But yeah, so I'm using the Slate tape machine almost always on backing vocals, almost always on electric guitars, sometimes on acoustic guitars, usually on bass and drums as well. And if I feel like it needs to be on something else, I'll add it. So those are kind of preloaded usually, and I'll just shut them off if it's not working. And as you asked, the compression and EQ on the stereo bus is activated, and I mix into it, and it's actually a big part of my sound. Like I don't think I like to mix with the compressor on, because that glue is going to be there anyway. So let's get it started and let's see what it's going to sound like. I don't want to, try and add compression after I've done all this other compression and stuff. Let's leave it there. And it makes my life much easier down the line, because I feel like I have to compress the vocal less and I have to do less work because that compressor is activated, and that EQ is activated. And the console emulation really adds a bit of vibe, a little bit of mojo. And so do we have any other questions here? Ceiling treated. Sennheiser 280s. I'm assuming that's headphones. How do you know if the effect benefits the sound? That is a good question. I guess you just experiment and see. I'll often, when I'm mixing, let's say the lead vocal. The lead vocal is the most important part of the track, because the vocal is the story. It's the performance that matters. And so if I'm mixing the vocal, I just kind of want to see what kind of space I want it to live in. And I have a bunch of reverbs already set up in my template, like a hall and a plate and a room and all these things. And I'll kind of just like see what's working, and based on like experience also. Like I know this is a kind of track that should have like more plate reverb. This is a track that needs a little bit more space. Maybe it needs a hall. And then I'll send the vocal to that effect, and I'll see if it's working. And also what's awesome about sending, to a completely wet auxiliary track is you just like lift up. It's like lifting a fader, right? Until it sounds good. And then you could back it off until it's, you're just changing how much gain is going out in the send. And that really, you just send it till it sounds good, or back off. And if it's not working, you try another reverb. So like, let's say like I have bus 15 is my room reverb. So I'll start with that. It's working, or it's not working, or it's working, but I could feel like I need to add to it. So maybe I'll send also to the room reverb, and I'll send also to the plate reverb. So I'm becoming so Israeli the way I'm talking. Also. So I might send to a few effects simultaneously from that one channel. I'll see what's working, and I'll kind of mesh it together. It's like trying things out. You try out a suit, or you try out, or like if a framer is framing a painting, like, oh, let's try red. No, let's try yellow. I don't know. Just trying to think of a good example that's a good analogy for that. Okay, Chazi, you're asking about, does the mix fill the whole sonic space? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you be a little bit more detailed? And I'll be happy to answer it. Rafi asks, how do you recommend using reverb and white noise cancellation? I don't know what you mean by white noise cancellation. I don't do any white noise cancellation. How do you recommend using reverb? Man, so much to talk about reverb. So I guess reverb, or any effect, I guess reverb and delay, it's all about ambience, right? You're setting the stage. What does the atmosphere that this record is taking place in feel like? Is it a concert hall? Is it an intimate place? Is it like a living room? And, you can kind of use that to give yourself an idea of what kind of reverb you need to use. And there's different types of reverbs. There's rooms, which kind of sound roomy. There's hall reverbs, which sound really big. A plate reverb is, I'm not nerdy enough to know exactly how it works, but they have a sound. It's a little bit more shimmery, a little less, because it's not based on an actual space. It's the only reverb that's like based on like electronics. It's like it's like a metallic plate with like electronic components on it, and it has like a really cool sheeny effect. So a lot of pop vocals use plate reverbs. The classic one is the EMT 140. There's a great plugin by Sound Toys called Little Plate, which I use all the time, which mimics that, and you could really go crazy with it. So yeah, there's my favorite reverb is ironically such a random reverb. There's a reverb by Waves called Man American Reverb, and it just sounds phenomenal. And I use it all the time. It's like my go-to, room and hall reverb. And one of their settings is called space. It's not even really a room reverb, but it sounds like a room reverb, but it's just like richer. And that one I use all the time. It just gives such a richness to the tone. So yeah, reverb is about what kind of space do you imagine it in. So, some songs need less reverb and some songs need a more subtle kind of reverb. So if you want a more dry song, then or let's say you have a dry guitar. You don't necessarily want to send it to a hall. A hall is going to make it sound really big and wet and reverby. And like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example of a hall reverb, but maybe like, I don't know why I'm thinking of that Adele song, but I'm not even sure if there's a hall reverb on that. But I set fire to the rain. Anyways, yeah, hall will sound like a hall. And so you just have to see what's working for the song. And I have my go-tos, and I have like types of reverbs that I like more. And yeah, I'll do a quick note about reverb is that you can affect your reverb channel, right? And this is something that I do all the time, is EQing either before or after a reverb. Other people do other stuff, crazy stuff like phasing, or you could do all kinds of stuff to a reverb channel. But I'm often EQing my reverbs so that they don't get too muddy. And it's often, when a mix people talk about mixes being muddy is usually referred to low end or the low mids. I think of it more as the low mids, maybe like 200 to 500 hertz, maybe even 600 hertz can be muddy frequencies. And these are frequencies that just, they sound muddy. I don't know how else to describe them, but they take up a lot of space, and and the reason why it's muddy is because like they live in the fundamental of most of the instruments. So the guitars, the vocals, the pianos, all the fundamentals are around 200, 300 hertz. So, correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong. I think I'm right. So yeah. And so that's why there's so much buildup in those frequency zones. And so a lot of mixing is carving out that space. And sometimes you think it's really muddy when it's not. And the reason why it's muddy is because a reverb can be muddy. And so one of the big tricks of reverb is just to high pass it. Like you can go high. You can go up to like 300, 400, 500 hertz, get rid of low end, and then you kind of have that shimmery ambience without it being too muddy. And there's another thing I'll talk about with reverb. So I do a lot of high passing or just dipping out a specific frequency in a reverb that's like making things sound muddy and making the mix less clear. Like I want clarity in my mix. You could also take out high end if it's adding too much sizzle and competing with the hi-hats or whatever. So some people low pass or high cut, the same thing. The reverb as well, maybe to 10K or so. So that depends on what you're going for. Everything will affect everything, and you kind of have to listen and make good decisions based on what you like, the records you've listened to, and what you want it to sound like. What else was I going to say about reverb? Oh, so there's a thing called pre-delay. So pre-delay is like delay, except it's so basically you're delaying. You send a signal to the reverb channel, but the reverb channel doesn't act for the length of the pre-delay. So let's say, usually you want to set pre-delay between like 20 and 40 milliseconds, let's say. And so basically, this is a trick to get more intimacy out of a vocal while keeping the effect and the ambience. So because the initial, impact of that vocal hits without reverb, it sounds like it's right in front of you, right? A dry vocal sounds like it's right in the room with you, right in front of you. And that obviously that has its place. Sometimes you just want a dry vocal, right? Because you want someone to sound like they're like right in front of your face. Like there are certain types of rap vocals that just you want it right in front of your face. But with using a pre-delay, you could give something a lot of atmosphere and ambience, and with that initial impact of intimacy and closeness. So by setting a pre-delay on your reverb, most reverb plugins have pre-delay as a built-in option. Funnily enough, the SoundToys one doesn't, but you could just use a delay effect and just say delay this by 20 milliseconds or something. It's a good place to start for pre-delay. But most plugins, you just pop the pre-delay to, let's say, 20 to 40 milliseconds, and you'll get this really intimate vocal sound that's also super ambient and dreamy and shimmery. So yeah, you could use. Yeah, I didn't even talk about this, but you could use reverb as an effect to make something have a sheen to it, a polish, and that's another thing people do with reverb. Basically, reverb is pretty glorious, and we were in a dry spell for a while, and we're kind of back in a reverb spell these days in terms of like the popular culture and the top 40 hits. So let's keep going on with these questions. A lot of instruments and vocals have their primary frequency in the mid-range area. You have the whole frequency range to work from low end all the way to the high end. That is true. A lot of does the mix fill the whole sonic space? Yeah, usually a mix will fill the whole sonic space. Well, wait, hold on. Let's see. Well, lots of instruments and vocals have their primary. This is from Chazi Spiro. Well, lots of instruments and vocals have their primary frequencies in the mid-range area. You have the whole frequency range to work from low end all the way to the high end. I just repeated myself. I think it came up twice accidentally. Yeah, so a mix, I guess, is usually the entire frequency range. Yeah, absolutely. So, we'll have a kick drum or a bass at the very bottom, let's say going down to maybe 20 or 30 hertz. And all the way in the top end, you'll have high end and you'll have the top of the vocal, like the air of the vocal. And there's all kinds of stuff in the middle. So most of the time, a mix will span the entire, whatever humans can hear, which is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. I mean, if you're lucky, 20,000 hertz. Most of us are getting up to like 15, 16,000 hertz these days. But yeah. Most mixes take up the whole space, but if you wanted to make a mix that sounded a little more old school, you could take off some top end, you could take off some bottom end, and make it sound a little bit less, more like a radio or something. A lot of the older records didn't have much subs. They kind of went down to maybe 100 or 80 hertz, and maybe they only went up to 8K or 10K. So it depends what you're going for. You could do all kinds of stuff. And, a lot of modern producers will filter things out depending on, maybe not for the entire mix, but for part of the mix, they'll like filter out like the bottom end or the top end and make it sound just either small or far away, or, there's a lot of effects you could do with just taking out frequency zones in a mix. So that's definitely a trick. People will like just cut out like, a lot of electronic producers have their filters, right? The filters they're just like usually high pass filters, low pass filters. And you'll cut off, the top end down to the bottom. We go. So it usually has a notch, and what's the word for the notch? Man, where's my brain when I need it? But yeah, you could just open any filter plugin and you'll see. And you basically you could do it with any EQ also by just adjusting the Q and automating it, so that like the edge of it goes up a little bit, like spikes up. And so basically, where it starts to drip to tail off, it kind of gives a little bit of a peak. So that's called the, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like a Q peak. And you could use just a regular EQ with automation to do that kind of filter effect. And so by messing with the whole frequency range of human hearing, you can really affect emotions inside of a mix or inside of a production. And this is something that's been done a ton with electronic music producers. Ben Drews, I always think of reverb as the ketchup on a dry burger. That's a great analogy. I love it.